Patterns and illusions. Welcome to the Futurist Mindset Show. My name is Tessa, your co-host, and here is your host, Reagan Rodriguez. Reagan is a futurist that teaches stratosphere wealthy legacy families how to become impact investors. Hi, Reagan.
Hello, Tessa. Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I love that we're talking about patterns and illusions and how this has to do
Yes.
with business as well.
Yeah, I had actually mentioned to you that I had just read this. It was, I think, just a day ago or so that you emailed me and I said, "Oh, I know the topic." And it was because I was reading this article, and what jumped out at me was this psychedelic kind of image. And so I just mentioned to you before we got on that I said, "Here's the link to it. Maybe you
Yes,
can show it so that others can see it."
there.
That right there. And right above that, there is a paragraph that, gosh, I think you see, you don't have to put the screen on anymore. I
Okay,
see
perfect. I
there's,
will put it in the chat for them when you're ready.
yeah. So there is there is a paragraph on there, and I just pasted it to Tessa, but it says that uh, I'm going to read exactly what it says. It says, "This goes to show how much imagination is at play," right? It says, "A line of inquiry that goes beyond just hearing or listening about this trick from other people." And it mentions that the illusion, how much we do, physiological index, large, the eye adjusting and the perceiving. Anyhow, people don't like things read to them. So it's a good article that you
Mhm.
can read. And what it reminded me also is what we talked about just a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about eyewitness observation, if you remember. I mentioned that I was at a deposition and I mentioned that eyewitness observation is not infallible. The idea of looking at something and then drawing conclusions and then doing things based on that can get you in a lot of trouble and lead to a lot of distress. So, as I mentioned, eyewitness observation is not infallible because you see something that may not be what you actually saw. So, depending upon uh, a lot of circumstances, uh, I went over this, if you remember, Tessa, a couple of weeks ago, that I said certain stress that you might be under, the time of day, maybe lighting, or I mentioned that you can also get into cross-cultural, right? And then that can get you in trouble because that eyewitness observation, it can not be as accurate as you think it can. Okay. And we accept them as true when there's really no validity to them. And then by virtue of the fact that we accept them as true, they become part of our process. So when I mentioned the title of this as Patterns and Illusions, here's what I want to go over with you guys today. What if nothing is holding you back in life? What if there is not a person, a thing, or a situation in the way of your next level, right? What if you realize that every excuse, hurdle, or blockage wasn't really was simply because you decided that in other words, it wasn't real. And it wasn't real simply because that's what I want to say, because you decided that it's not so. That's the power that you have when you think about it. The answer, the motivation, and the solutions are what, Tessa, they're right in front of you, right? The more aware that you become, then the more you'll see that the patterns, that as I mentioned, the illusions around is that's what's gonna then hold you back, right? So think about a pattern of thinking, of feeling that does seem to hold you back. Okay, and it might be holding you back from your financial goals. So then what do you want to do? You want to set a goal around that. And the goal would be, here's how I would set the goal. I would say, I'm going to see myself overcoming that pattern or that illusion or that thought that keeps me from my goals. Okay, let me repeat that again, but I'm going to say it so that you would understand. See yourself overcoming a pattern or illusion, a thought that keeps you from setting that goal. Okay, so why are we going to do that? Well, here's Here's why I do it, because I know if you're like me, sometimes you might have doubt. You might blame, you might then get a little lazy, and or you might have some fears, right? And consequently, that creates unnecessary struggle. So the way you move out of those patterns is by responding differently than how you have before, right? You're going to instead focus on what you desire and move through the resistance phase to being different. Sure, there's going to be discomfort in that because there's always discomfort in what, Tessa, anytime you're growing. So discomfort, as we both know, it's temporary. And as I'd like to say, it sure beats sabotage and suffering. So let's instead, right? So instead, let's be comfortable being uncomfortable. Why? Because then that means you're growing. I have something that I wrote down that I wouldn't forget on that. Speaking of patterns, illusions, I was reading this the other day in a book I was reading on when you're talking to your audience. So I think this might be helpful. I kind of somewhat memorized it. The only thing I wrote down is it says, a guy with a dragon tattoo on his left cheek. That reminds me of what I want to talk about. When you're painting a picture to your audience, whoever your audience is, if you're watching this, you want to avoid broad descriptions. So if you ask them to imagine a guy with a tattoo, they'll see drastically different things, right? So instead, what do you want to do? You want to introduce them to a guy with a dragon tattoo on his left cheek. See, now that is interesting, right? Now, I also want to mention, because I know that a lot of people on here that are watching this are maybe are dealing with what their identity around money is. And I know I talked with my friend Grace and Pam that I know you've met
Yes, I love
before.
them.
Just on Saturday, they were at a conference, and we were talking about our identity around money. And last week, one of the trustees of the foundation I manage wanted to meet with me. He had flown into Miami for a couple hours, and he wanted to get together with me. And so we talked about the identity of money. And when you consider your identity around money, in other words, how you see yourself, it's going to play a really big part in how much you earn and how much wealth you believe you deserve. So one of the things this gentleman had mentioned to me is that your identity is accumulation of your attitude, your values, your habits, and beliefs up to now, right? So your identity is shaped over time, and largely it's unconscious. And I remember when he said that, I was like, that's what hit me, that it's unconscious. That's the scary thing about it, right? Because when we think about growth, we were talking about that before, growth is intentional. Growth requires more of a conscious approach to conditioning, right? Changing your identity around money. And then wealth starts with changing what you focus on and then rehearsing in your mind on a daily basis. So I thought about this just now, it hit me. So that sounds great, right? It's a lot of good talk. What would be the goal around that? I'm going to make it real simple, guys. Here's my goal I would set. Just describe an identity around money and do that in one sentence. If I asked you, describe your identity around money in one sentence, mine would be real simple. Well, I was going to say flow, that money flows, but that just was an answer that sounds good. And we hear that, right? That's like a fortune cookie kind of thing. Money here would, if I really thought about that, if you asked me, Regan, describe your identity around money in one sentence, I'm going to say the seeds that you sow, right? In other words, God can't steer a parked car. You do have to work. You have to do something. So that's my sentence around that, is that sow seeds around not just your work, around being conscious as we mentioned. And why are we going to do that? Because self-awareness is 80% of the growth,
Yes.
right? That's how you're going to change. Think of it like a GPS. You have to know where you're starting from to reset and reach a new destination. So when you allow yourself to then just be honest about where you are now, then what do? You're able to kind of embrace that kind of shift towards expanding your identity around what are we talking about? Wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your descriptive statements do not align with your vision, then change it to something that does. And then, Tessa, I learned something else from this investor, and I wrote it down. I wrote it down as stop while you can. And it's so appropriate to that image that you showed earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. Why? Because when you have a plan to execute, it's hard to notice the signs that are telling you that it won't work. So that plan, and I wrote this word down too, because it's not one I had heard. This plan is called continuation bias, a continuation bias. That is responsible for many failed projects and a handful of air crashes. This guy was flying, had his own plane. So that's why you'd mentioned that to me. And he said, or I asked him, so then how do you avoid that? And quite simply, in just a few words, he said this to me. He said, Reagan, watch out for small signals and changes in your circumstances. So if I may pick on you a little bit,
Yes.
because I know that you help people uh, build websites, and I know that there are advertisements lately with people saying, oh, you can do this on AI. And
Mm-hmm.
I know with what you do is so much more than that. And there's so much consulting around not just building a website. A lot of these ones that I see on YouTube that are advertised, it's just a pamphlet. That's all it is. You're just going to see this, and now you go to the next page, and it's just, and what you do is something that involves consulting around a funnel that will then lead that person to move forward. So I said I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Tell me your thoughts on that and what you do to not be so focused, if you will.
Right, right. Well, I think I've learned a lot from you and some of the people that you hang out with. So I've learned to look ahead. And so I'm not focusing on that exact moment situationally, I suppose. I'm seeing the signs of what's to come and what people are saying out there. So I could get very focused on what I do and like not hunker down, but, get stubborn about I need to keep doing this and I'm going to find, just keep finding people that need it this way. But I think with what I hear from you and that futurist mindset, is that I should be looking at how I can be ahead of that. And sometimes it means leaving behind the way that you used to do things. It may mean that I incorporate AI into what I do or into how we build the base foundation and we find a different value, or it's a different industry entirely. It's one of those things where you're just not so blindsided. I think it's like situational blindness is what I've also heard it called, where you just can't see outside of what you're doing at that moment because you've got this goal and you feel like you have to keep it. So I feel like my skills of being a little bit more adaptable have improved substantially since working with you and the futurist mindset. Really? For sure.
Because that can happen to me. I can get so focused that sometimes I'm that way with emails that then I can make little errors. And that's when I know I need to just step away or maybe go for a walk. So it seems like you're better at that than I am, actually.
No, I wouldn't say, I think I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, but I do think that a lot of, I am trying to reprogram, subconsciously doing, music, meditation type things that help to reset unconsciously, so you're you're recreating a script in your brain. So I'm working hard on that because I know I am one of those that could very easily just get knee deep in what most people need. Most people are not ready for AI. They haven't even explored what AI has to offer. It'd be very easy just to say, I'm going to change my market, but I feel like I have to be ahead of the game. That's just my personality.
Yeah, good for you. I actually had six other points that I talked about in terms of um, significance kind of or things. In other words, circumstances are important, as you mentioned, but emotional needs are significantly more important to your financial reality. So the emotional needs impact every single aspect of your financial identity, from what you value to how much you earn. So there are so many emotional patterns. I've noticed this for myself, Tessa, that kind of influence my financial reality. So I wrote down six here and I didn't want to miss them.
Yes, let's
So
go
I
through
wrote it down here.
them.
Number one, the need to feel significant in your life.
Mm.
Number two, the need to feel certainty. Number three, the need to care for loved ones, right? Number four, the need to mix it up and try something new, as we just talked about. And then the need to grow and evolve. And then the last one is the need to feel worthy of what you want. So let's think about this. I can think of a quick goal that we can set around that. Simply identify an emotional need or needs that drive your financial motivation. And I like to use the word right now. That kind of goes into my subconscious mind better. So let me say that again. Identify an emotional need that is driving your financial motivation right now. And why are we going to do that? Because our emotions is what's running the show. Whether we're aware of it or not, our emotional needs, patterns are universal and are met in various ways and levels. So let's consider this, okay? In what ways do you feel significant with what you have? I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember that, Tessa, where I talked about being content? And I said, I'm not concerned about being happy or joy. I'm more interested in being content. So what makes you feel the most financially secure? What financial situation would make you feel good about yourself? And in what ways are you growing your net worth? In what ways do you need to move? In what ways do you need more variety in a certain position? So the answer to those questions are they're going to reveal something to you. They're going to help determine what emotional needs are driving the results that maybe you might be lacking.
You need a
right?
stronger, you have to have a stronger need to be able to accomplish the goal that you're trying to, this bigger goal that you're trying to accomplish. Is that right?
I'm glad you brought that up. You're actually great at that. And I'm not so much, because we were talking about this yesterday when I had mentioned to you that I'd like you to help me with kind of managing some interns of mine. And I said, what would we do in this situation? And you said something that I would have never thought of, because my thing was, or what I normally do is I say, look, you want to just set like a routine. I don't say this to them and say you want to be like a robot, but that's what I kind of mean. And I say, if you can set a routine around it and every day you know what you need to do. And then you said to me, well, one of the things I do when they're young people or someone new that I'm teaching a task to is you kind of said the opposite of that, that they don't want to be known as robots. Do you mind sharing a little bit about kind of what you meant by that? And let's assume there was a task that seemed very repetitive, like what I'm going to have them do, send emails to a certain list I have. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? Because some of the things that you said, I'll admit, were a little, if I say over my head, they were kind of new to me. And then last night while I was going to bed, I thought, I feel good about the fact that Tessa's the right person for this position. Talk on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, when we're training team members, we sit down and have time where they can ask questions. So making it more of a curiosity thing. They want to know how or why or what are they doing and what's it actually producing in the business. So we give them a big picture view of like, this action here is producing these leads, which are closing this and building, or having this many trees that are built are growing somewhere because of this, so it's a bigger picture whole of what they're contributing to. So when we do that and we open the floor to questions, we tend to get people who are going to solve the problems. Like, we're not just like you said, creating a robot that's doing one thing that we tell them to do and they show up every day and just do that, only that. We want to create people who are solving problems, and maybe they come to us with like 2 solutions as opposed to a problem. They're like, hey, I have a problem, but I think I can solve it with X and Y. So it's just about creating an environment where they feel safe to be able to do that, and that they feel valued and heard. But they're still, it's a question and answer session where you're still building in the routines and that repetitiveness, but they also see it as a time where they can get questions answered. So it does both.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That brings to the last topic that I want to talk about, and that's investment of your time. There are 1,440 minutes in a day. So on that note, Tessa, I think that we should all be intentional about how we invest our 1,440 minutes each day, right? Because every second counts in life. Lives all around the world are born, saved, and ended within seconds. Our time on earth is not promised. So maybe instead we should embrace every minute of every day. What if instead we were 100% present and focused on what we're doing and maybe who you're with when you're together, right? It's amazing when I see people having meetings at coffee shops, or the other day I saw a table of 4 and they're all on their phones, so
it's sad.
Yeah. So maybe choose feelings and thoughts. I talked about that the other week, about you, right? Or about others that are supportive, right?
Yes.
So in order to maximize your time, and I'm going to say this like I mentioned before, in order to maximize your time today, determine your outcome and how you want to feel before you do that thing that you've got to do. With that leading the way, you're then going to kind of move forward, enjoying and unfolding that experience, that moment by moment.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for all this valuable information and insights. I appreciate it. Like I said, I always learn something new from these shows every time. So thank you. And if you're visiting us for the first time and you haven't hit the bell to get reminders yet, you can click on that, subscribe to the channel, and you'll get notifications when we go live. And we are here Fridays at noon Eastern time. So if you have any questions, of course, Reagan over at Fifth Avenue Capitol, and the information is in the post for you of the article that we did and the paragraph that explains a little more. So
yeah, I didn't want to read it. Nobody likes to have things read to them. I looked at the article and I'm like, this goes to show how much, and I'm like, forget it. Look at the whole article's pretty good.
It is. And I just appreciate you, Reagan, and we'll see you all next week. Have a blessed week.